Stareable Fest 2021 is a 4-day celebration of innovation in independent streaming series. We're a creator convention, bringing you the most relevant production workshops, panel discussions, giveaways, and an industry marketplace connecting the next wave of indie series to execs at AMC Networks, Blumhouse, Disney TV Animation, and more. We're a festival, screening your new faves, from rich fantasy to absurdist comedy, hosting an award ceremony, and several parties to kick it with your fellow fans and creators alike.
If you call it if you call it
Hello, and welcome to the first day and first event of Stareable Fest 2021. Our conversation, Stareable First Look with AMC Networks. Stareable Fest is a premier annual indie TV and web series festival in the US, and the new home for digital creative talent in the TV industry. We honor the year's best content and provide space for the next generation of creators to connect with industry executives, grow their network, learn new skills, and build community. Stareable Fest is presented by Dell Technologies and NVIDIA, making workstations and monitor solutions purpose-built for creators like you. We'd also like to thank our other sponsors and partners, AMC Networks, Disney TV Animation, Rizzle, and Just for Laughs, for making Stareable Fest 2021 possible. I'll be your moderator. My name is Ajay Kishore. I'm the founder and CEO of Stareable. Before we get started, a little digital housekeeping. We'll be taking your questions and comments later in the session, so please feel free to participate. To submit a question, click on the question mark bubble and type it to us. Now, I'd like to welcome our guests, Kevin Dreyfuss and Laura Luckenbaugh. Kevin Dreyfuss is SVP Digital Content and Gaming Studio for AMC Networks, Sundance TV, IFC Channel, and BBC America. And he leads the Emmy-winning team creating original content, interactive and XR experiences for shows ranging from The Walking Dead, Better Call Saul, Killing Eve, Planet Earth, and beyond for digital platforms. Laura Luckenbaugh is Director of Original Programming, International Programming and Development, and as such develops original scripted television series and oversees international co-productions for AMC, Sundance TV, BBC America, and AMC Plus, including Gangs of London, Quiz, Kin, and the upcoming This Is Going to Hurt, and Interview with the Vampire.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here virtually again.
Kevin, Laura, I'm so excited to have this opportunity to catch up on all the pieces that we're working on together, both the AMC Best Female Creator Prize. This is the second year of, but also our First Look initiative. Before we start, I thought I'd start with something a bit more high level. I think when creators envision TV and industry executives, there's a bit of a mystery to the whole endeavor. So would both of you describe what your jobs are and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Laura, why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm part of the international team. I program for our 3 US networks and also for AMC Plus. And so my job is really just very simply to find great new stories for us to tell and then kind of be the creative point for the network on those shows from soup to nuts. So development, production, post, and kind of everything in between. And so it's to empower our creators and make sure we can tell their story in the best way possible. And also kind of often to serve as fresh eyes who are still invested in the project, but a little less creatively in the weeds. And always with an eye, of course, to our brand and what we know about our viewers and what will most excite them.
And so I run a part of our organization called the Digital Content and Gaming Studio, which is essentially our internal studio that creates and distributes content to all of our digital streaming, AVOD, SVOD, FVOD, FAST, social channels. It's a short form and medium form, I guess. I'm not sure what to call these days, connected to our existing IP, to a lot of the shows that Laura's already working on and others, as well as working with our talent on original content, as well as working with brands on our branded entertainment side, and under that group also falls all sorts of non-video type things like publishing, merchandising, RPGs, gaming, etc. But video is really, because of the company and who we are, that's kind of the core of what we do.
Awesome. Thank you both for that. So I'd love to jump into the Best Female Creator Prize. Your teams chose 3 projects as finalists this year: If I'm Alive Next Week, Good Monsters, and Story for You. I'd love to hear from you both. What drew you to those projects?
You go, Lauren.
Yeah, I think for me, it was the singularity of the approach and the storytelling. They're all telling, very personal stories, but doing it in a new way that feels like it's showing us something we haven't seen before, or we haven't considered this particular life event or escapade in this particular way before. So as someone who looks at a lot of stories, they just really stood out from the crowd as feeling really distinct.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think it's funny in talking to, getting to finally to meet the creators of these 3 projects, who were all amazing. One thing that they all have in common in hindsight, and I don't know that this was something we had consciously when we were selecting them, was they all find a really unusual tone that really rides the line and modulates in a way that is extremely hard to do, between drama and comedy, in one instance music, again taking extremely dramatic and in some cases kind of tough life moments and treating them with sort of humanism and sort of humor that's I think ties them all together. And I don't know, maybe through the last year and a half we've been through, that's another reason they all sort of popped for us, was the kind of generosity to all the different characters and points of views within each of them, because maybe we all need a little of that right now. Not sure. And also just, I think these were early directing efforts from all of the filmmakers here, and were just amazingly directed. Obviously the writing was great, but getting great performances and really nailing a really tricky tone on all of them was really impressive.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure if they're in the audience, I'm sure they're super enthusiastic about hearing that sort of feedback. So what happens now for these creators? They met with your team. How do you think about kind of what happens after this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities within our company. So when we say AMC Networks, we're talking about, this is going to be an insanely long list. There's linear channels. There's AMC, BBC America, the home of Killing Eve, IFC TV, home of Doc Now, Sundance TV. There's AMC Plus, which is our premier streaming service. There's Shudder, which is our streaming service just for horror and thrillers. There's Acorn, which is our streaming service just for British drama and mystery. There's All Black, which is our African-American story experience. There's Sundance Now. So we have a niche approach, and we're hitting lots of different targeted audiences across all of these different platforms, which means there's a lot of opportunity to match creators and unusual subject matters with different audiences. It's a little complicated how that works. I think we're not the same as a digital native company like a Vox or a BuzzFeed or somebody that is, or the Dodo or some of these others that are really, or even Roku, that are really in the business of developing and acquiring short form in and of itself as a business. We do create a ton of short form and distribute it and monetize it and attach brands to it and all the rest of it. But it's really about, for us, it's a little more about finding new voices, new creators that we can bring into the kind of creative machine that feeds all those different touch points I just described. And we can match them up with, some of them might be right to talk to Laura and her group about developing specific IP or getting into the mix on linear projects. Some could be within my group, finding new directors and voices that can be attached to something is not as sexy, but still great as like brand films, for working with brands. So there's a ton of opportunity. It's not the straight line that you might hear from some of the other companies you'll be talking to here at Stareable, but because we are, we have so many touch points, and we are coming from our heritage as a linear TV cable business. But it's really exciting for us. I think that one of the advantages of this last year working with Stareable and before that is just being exposed to so many new voices that to be able to share around the company to all those different places. And there's so much opportunity coming out of it.
Laura, would you like to add anything there?
No, I think, we're echoing everything that Kevin said, and we're particularly always looking for more emerging talent. And I think as a team, we're really good at fostering folks and helping them make the leap maybe to their first long form series. So we love coming to places like this and finding folks that are doing amazing work and kind of getting to roll up our sleeves and work with them.
I think that's one of the things I appreciate about the partnership is, careers are usually not linear, right? And I think television is especially not like a linear industry, and AMC has so many different facets to it that there are a lot of different ways for these conversations to go, but all of them potentially very meaningful, right? Whether it's getting a directing job on an existing TV project or licensing a piece of IP or being in a writer's room or, so all of those things when we think about, creators trying to break into the industry, there, especially I think it's worth emphasizing when we talk to folks that are already in the industry. It's like, well, those are huge opportunities, and I love the fact that when we make these introductions, there are a lot of different ways that they can go, all of them that would unlock huge doors.
Yeah, I think the other advantage of all these different platforms that we talked about is that the opportunities don't necessarily need to be traditional. Like I think that even some of the shows that have ended up on our air in the last year took, to your point, these very circuitous paths. This has come up a bunch in the last week just because for some reason I'm slightly obsessed with the show Ultra City Smiths, which is our stop motion animated murder mystery noir baby doll stop motion musical. Really, that started as a one-off YouTube series years ago.
I didn't know that.
And it sort of bubbled along beneath the surface, and then all the sort of stars aligned between production necessities during the pandemic, availabilities of incredible voice talent, the desire from some of our streaming platforms for unconventional content to bring something like that to the surface. And more of those things are coming. I think of another one, which is Kevin Can Fuck Himself is the name of the show, which is a bane of my existence and is renewed for a second season. Again, a really crazy, interesting hybrid of single camera drama and multicam comedy that just came at just the right time in the conversation. And again, in a time when audiences that have been streaming nonstop for a year and a half from their couches were looking for something new. So the time is right now for all this.
Yeah. I think also one of the things that's changing, like how these creators and the talent get connected to opportunities, is the work that organizations, especially AMC, is doing to kind of improve diversity and inclusion efforts. I know that there's been a lot of a focus on that over the course of the 2 years that we've been working together. Can you talk about how that's happening internally, and what are the newly available opportunities that are becoming open and creators?
Yeah, I think, like everyone, we've been taking a good hard look at what we've done as a company and where we need to improve when it comes to equity and diversity. So we're really, it's all hands on deck right now to look at how we can do better. We've made some good steps forward. Our recent green lights to series including Dark Winds and Interview with the Vampire, both are shows that we committed to 50% writers from underrepresented groups within the writers' room. And we're also working with organizations like Color of Change to take a good hard look again at who's working behind the camera and see how we can improve representation on our sets. So we're working every day to continue to push forward. I think the other thing within my group specifically is we've been making a really concerted effort to do more work with emerging writers. And again, like help foster folks who maybe are working on their first long form project for TV, but we think just have really strong voices, and looking at how we can help bring their authentic stories to the air. So it's an ongoing process on our side.
Yeah, I would say that if you took in toto, like the showrunner decisions, the writer room decisions that Laura just talked about, the casting decisions that are being announced around a lot of these shows, you can see it sort of concrete sort of movement. I think in my group, there's an additional good pressure coming from brands and advertisers. It's not just coming from within the call's not just coming from inside the house. Like it's literally if we're going to be working with so for instance, we have a cocktail show, a digital native cocktail show. We do with Coleman Domingo, who's one of our actors, that is sponsored by Diageo. We have some other shows that we do that we work with brands directly on, and they have mandates on their side that are driven by stockholders, and they have commitments they've made that we need to be held to as well. So it's an additional pressure in a good way that it's not just something nice we can put in a press release. Like we're being evaluated inside and outside. So, I think the other, it's also, I'd say from a personal level, it's a constant reminder, just a constant post-it in your brain to just think through every decision you're making in terms of who you're working with from a production standpoint, from a writing standpoint, from a directing standpoint, to make sure you're not just falling back on the existing people and perpetuating an existing system when there's great opportunities out there that should be sort of widened. So that's just something on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, something that I was thinking about the feedback that you had on the finalists for the Best Female Creator Prize and the uniqueness of tone and the specificity of vision and the way in which they kind of tap dance their way through different genres. I'd like to think that, especially as you see, one of the things that we think about a lot at Stareable is, well, as you see this talent and the uniqueness of these voices, these conversations become easier and the ball rolls down the hill a little bit faster, so that the next time we come back to you, and Kevin, I'm sure you can vouch for this, I'm always coming back to you and saying, like, how do we grow this partnership? Like, what are the other things that we can do? And I would like to think that those conversations become easier because, and it's a testament to the quality that these creators are coming up with, but it's because you're seeing and your eyes are opening and the organization is seeing what's possible in tapping into the value that's being created here.
Yeah, I think I've said this from the very beginning, like, part of my French, it's just like, this is really good shit, and it has been from day one, like, and that makes everything easier when, I mean, at the end of the day, we're an entertainment company, and everything that comes through Stareable to us is entertaining. Like, I mean, it's, there is no like, oh, take your medicine, eat your vegetables. They are really great. Like, these are not obligations or anything. Like, we're not checking off boxes. They're just, it's great stuff, and sharing it around to everybody else within the organization when it's relevant. That's the same reaction for everybody. Like, whoa, there's some amazing stuff happening over here, both in terms of format. So I think the short form format allows for all sorts of experimentation, which you can see if everybody can go to the screening rooms and see some of the things we selected. Like, you can see it in the format, as well as the kinds of stories that get told that have not been traditionally been told in linear TV. So all those things come together. So
yeah, something I believe to my core is that the only way this happens is because, it has to be good business, and that's I think where we're so focused on. There really just is amazing quality content out there, and if we elevate it, like, these doors will open. Laura, I know you focus on international creators as part of your work. We got a question from one of our official selections this year as we were setting up marketplace meetings, to a French creator, and they said, well, my project is very French. Is it going to resonate with Americans? And so I'd be curious to get your perspective on that. Like, what do you think of that statement?
That is a really good question. And it's something that we do have to be conscious of, right? Because we're programming for an American audience. So we have to think about what is that American access point or way into the story. But I think we found it's very rarely limiting in terms of the kinds of stuff that we can do, in part because there's a lot of ways to get there. The first being, of course, if you naturally have a prominent American character who can be the US eyes and ears in a room for the viewer, that's a huge help. Shows like Killing Eve do that really well. We always want to make sure that it feels organic to the story and not like we're forcing an American character in where they wouldn't be. There's also, a lot of genres just really translate. So for example, one of our first shows as a company was The Night Manager with Tom Hiddleston and Hugh Laurie, or as a group. But that's classic Le Carré spy fare. It translates kind of wherever you set it, whoever the key players are, we have a fascination with that. Or Gangs of London, organized crime, another very Eurocentric show that Americans have really latched onto. But I think the most important thing is just finding those big universal relatable themes. And speaking to things that are in the conversation here in the US, or just natural human experiences that anyone can latch onto. And, you can set it here in the US, you can set it in a small town in Tasmania, anywhere in between, and folks kind of get it. So as long as we can find that way into a story, we can make it work. We can find a way to make it work.
I think the first time we ever talked, I asked you if it was someone on your team or you yourself who was responsible for Le Bureau, the French spy show, because when I watched that show, I thought it was the most incredible thing that I've ever seen. It's on Sundance TV. It's an AMC property. And I mean, when I watched that show, I had never even thought about that idea of French TV. And in the last 2 years, I've watched so many more French television shows than I thought were even possible. Like, how do you think about that growing success in being able to import foreign projects into the US and having them resonate success? I mean, and it's happening across the Squid Game, right? How do you see that growing success, and how is that changing how you view foreign projects?
I think number one, that's incredibly thrilling. And I think it makes a lot of sense given how connected the world is. Also, I think we've just seen over the last 5 to 10 years, the floodgates have opened in terms of international content being available to people. I remember I was a big UK comedy buff when I was in college, and the only way to get that stuff was to go to Kim's Video and rent the DVD and hope it worked in your DVD player. And it was really hard to get. And now, streamers have been a big part of it. We've been a big part of it. With our group was formed, I think, 6 years ago, and we've been doing international co-productions and getting folks that kind of content since. And I think everyone's getting more used to, watching things that aren't necessarily from the US and finding that there is a lot to latch onto there. And a lot of those shows are kind of becoming the water cooler series right now. So I think for us, it just means we want to keep finding more great stuff. There's an audience for it. And I think it creates the opportunity to experiment more. I think Squid Game's a really good example. We're looking at that and going wow, that's something that folks are really responding to. And it means that we can take more risks in terms of the kinds of international stories we're telling.
How do you find international projects? What does that process look like for your team?
Yeah. So, in part, it's very similar to developing for domestic, where it's, we're meeting with producers whose work we respect and seeing what they're up to and what might be right for us to get on board with, talking to agents to find that new great talent to develop in-house. We go to a lot of markets from MIP to C21 and everything in between to, meet with creators that we haven't encountered before and see what they have going. But then I think, we find a lot of development from places like Stareable, and other festivals like this that are giving folks an opportunity to have their work seen. And those have translated into deals for us. So it is a big part of what we do, is who we meet at places like this.
And when you find them, going back to that idea of almost like directing traffic, like where do these projects go within AMC? Are there specific channels that are focused on this? Is it thinking about IP for future development? Is it about licensing them whole cloth? Like what do those conversations internally look like?
All of the above. So what I love about our group is that we can get on board projects at very different stages of development. Co-production, sometimes the train is about to leave the station and we're hopping on as that last bit of creative and financial kind of support. But we really love to develop from scratch. So we love to see things as early as possible. And I think, we have a lot of different opportunities, like Kevin said, under the AMC umbrella. Our group is about AMC, AMC Plus, Sundance, and BBC America. But, under my boss is the Sundance Now group and the Acorn group. We're also very in touch with Shudder and All Black. And so what I love about working here is, if you find something that you love and it's not going to be quite a fit for what you oversee, we know who to call and maybe find an opportunity for it there. So, and then it's just, once we have the home, it's working with the creators to get it in the best shape to get a green light.
And for you, the digital studio, how do you think about the focus for that? And I know that's been a steady evolution. You're increasingly making your own original content. Like where are you with that? And how do you think about what comes next?
We've done, you asked us to describe our job, and at a certain point this year, I would have said my job is essentially creating decks, trying to describe my job. And at a certain point, we went through various diagrams to try and explain what you just asked. And I think the best one, without actually drawing it out, is kind of concentric circles, almost in a bullseye. And and that's sort of how we think about the areas we can play in and create original content. Look, everything we create is designed to bring revenue into the company in some way, shape, or form, just at a base level. The tightest connection is content we create that is specifically connected to the story worlds of our shows. We're currently, one of the things we're currently working on right now is an animated Saturday morning cartoon style spinoff from Better Call Saul, believe it or not. That's a sort of young Saul and Friends kind of adventure. That, as kind of wacky as it sounds, is a pretty tight connection to our existing worlds. We do similar things around The Walking Dead, around upcoming Interview with the Vampire, Killing Eve, etc. We are also partnering with a podcast company called Realm on Orphan Black scripted podcast with Tatiana Maslany that's coming out at the end of this month. Sorry, my computer just did something weird. Something crashed. That's kind of the tightest connection. I think the next circle out is our talent, who are amazing and have their own kind of interests. They have their own fan bases outside of our shows. So we work on shows that come to us or will connect with our existing talent, like Coleman Domingo, who I spoke about, Ray Seahorn, who's one of the stars of Better Call Saul. We work on a show outside of, not connected to Saul. And so we're constantly looking for ways we can sort of match up ideas with existing talent, because as Laura just said, you go across all those different networks, you go across all those different touch points, there's so much talent that we're actually able to access. And then I think the last sort of circle out, which is the one that is the newest and has a lot of opportunity, and is in some ways the most amorphous to describe, is things that aren't necessarily connected to our talent. They aren't even necessarily connected to our shows, but they are connected to audiences we can confidently connect to. So we have shows that are shows set in epic worlds like The Walking Dead, or the Anne Rice Universe Interview with the Vampire, or I would argue even something like Killing Eve has a really robust kind of like backstory and mythology behind it. Those shows, and so once you've reached those audiences, you can start to think about other original content that can also connect to those audiences. We are doing a bunch. None of this stuff is really. This is sort of this isn't video, but we're working on a lot of role-playing game and other ideas that don't necessarily connect to our IP, but connect to those audiences that we know how to reach through those epic worlds. On the other hand, we have a lot of sort of real award-winning drama. There's an entire sort of, you've got Saul, Breaking Bad, Dark Winds, which is coming up, which Laura mentioned. And that is a whole other audience that we can reach with original content. I think the trick with that is finding the reason. Sometimes it's as simple as there's a creator hook, there's a brand that there's a connection to, and that can sort of justify doing something fully original like that. Sometimes we just take a flyer and we do these things to pilot them out on the understanding that just like any other sort of studio would, but in a sort of miniature way, we're going to pilot a bunch of stuff this year, see what hits, and see if we can grow from there. So I'd say that's the complicated way of laying it out, but that's probably the simplest way also of laying it out. That's kind of our decision matrix.
To me about how Twitch started out as very focused on The Walking Dead, and as you proved out the audience and kind of the interaction and the mechanism of it, it's expanded, right? It's become a little bit more of a thematic universe.
It's a great example. So Twitch. We started our Twitch channel in partnership with Twitch. At this point, about a year and a half ago, it was initially just a Walking Dead universe focused channel. It was really devoted entirely to the Walking Dead universe. The hosts we brought in ended up building up their own audiences and started naturally coming up, suggesting, "Hey, can we late night put in a show that just focuses on this genre of horror? Hey, I know this isn't part of our brief, but I love Creepshow. It's on Shudder. Can we get Greg Nicotero on to talk about Creepshow?" And then it just sort of naturally evolved to the point where Twitch actually came to us and said, "You've built up an audience that's really more of a horror-based audience. You as a company between AMC, Sundance TV, Shudder, IFC Midnight, which is also an under umbrella, have a real pedigree. Can we expand out this audience?" And so it's a great example of like, it just sort of evolved into something bigger. And then even some of the hosts that grew their audiences there, we're starting to pull them in to create other shows with us outside of Twitch. So
fit into that? You've talked about it a couple times in various contexts, but like what is the branded content strategy and how are you thinking about that?
Right. So branded content, this is something relatively new in my group. We essentially merged our original content team, which I run, and our branded entertainment team into a single entity called the Content Room. And the idea here is that we not only tackle content from the perspective of that sort of target analogy I just threw out there, but we also function as an agency, an in-house agency. Vice has a similar version of this. A lot of other sort of media companies have their take on this, where we take all that same access we just described this entire time to creators, talent, production understanding and production know-how, and can go to brands that we're either already working with or fresh to them to say, hey, we can actually bring this to bear on fully originals that are brand films. I think a great example of this was last year, might have been at this point 2 years, but time has no meaning anymore, was a film we did with Ancestry.com called Railroad Ties that Sasha Jenkins, who's a documentarian, directed, that the underlying reason for it was to talk about the tools that Ancestry.com brings to the table in terms of being able to understand your history better, to understand the present. But what they ended up doing was creating a little mini documentary about a bunch of strangers who did not know how they were intimately connected. And over the course of the documentary, sort of find out in some really profound ways. It's a standalone documentary. It's won awards on its own, but it's a brand film that was brought in by a brand. So that's the kind of thing we're working on as well.
Shift gears a little bit. I want to take some time to chat about our First Look initiative that we've been working on for the past couple months. So to recap how that works, each month we share with you and you share and discuss internally the the best projects that we get in our genre categories, meaning sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. So we're a couple months into this, and we've shared some projects over that time. And so, I'd kind of love to get your feedback on that. Just to start, like, what happens when we send those over? Like, what's the process internally?
Well, we start popping the popcorn, and then yeah, I mean, again, I think it's just to your point. This one we are specifically focusing on genre. So like, we kind of made a decision mutually with you, like, hey, if we're going to be doing this on an ongoing basis, let's really, like, at least for this first year, let's just like go for what is kind of the low hanging fruit within our ecosystem, which is really finding existing genres that are high concept, that match to that sort of epic worlds mindset I just described. And like, that's still a pretty, that is a way of narrowing down a sort of a great big funnel of amazing stuff. Let's just find one way to narrow it down. Another way is to focus on female and diverse filmmakers. Again, for all the reasons we just described at the beginning here, like, we have plenty of ways of getting stuff from white dudes. Let's not do that here. And let's specifically focus on it. And there's a ton of, no shocker, that sort of intersection has yielded some great stuff. Some of that stuff ended up being on this list for our best female creators. And I think what happens is a team comprised of people from my group as well as from the sort of more traditional development side, we're basically watching everything, we're evaluating everything. As I sort of led off with, it's not as if we're saying, okay, out of these pools, we're going to just start acquiring content per se. We're basically building lists of, okay, here's a cool project that we need to share with group or platform XYZ. Shudder should see this, blah, blah, blah. Or here's a really interesting creator that we want to make sure we come back to when we are coming back and building a room around something. So I think it's a little different from the female creator because we focus on genre, because we're looking at diverse creators, and because there's more of it. We're getting it really every month. And it just creates an ongoing stream that can sort of push into ongoing activities. I don't want to speak for Laura, but I know within our group, there's a constant monthly flow of deadlines, opportunities, proposals coming in and going out to different brands, upfronts where brands are looking to put money into different projects. Like, those things are always ongoing, and knowing we're getting this constant stream of content and creators coming in as we're going through that process is really helpful.
Laura, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think to piggyback off that, we're always looking for new stories and new IP. So that's one thing, but we're also really good, I think, at matchmaking, creators with the right project, whether it's staffing or block directing on our shows or, new IP we have where we're really looking for those fresh voices. I really do like the idea of a constant conversation, because it's oftentimes, the right person meets the right project at the right time. And that's how the best stuff happens here.
Yeah, I would add one thing there, is that the conversation piece, great point. Because I do think the relationship between us and Stareable hasn't necessarily been one way. I think with every new batch of content we're looking at, in some ways it's sort of like, you know it when you see it, and it's a little hard to describe. So being able to see so much over the course of the year, to be able to say like, here's why this resonated with this group. Here's why, here's the interesting pieces of this. This is why this voice popped for us. And then I think you're able to go back on your side, on the Stareable side, to be like, okay, now I think with every round, we're getting a better understanding of the kinds of things that are popping for the different groups inside AMC.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It has been this collaborative process of saying, what are the right, because, what is a great project for organization X is not necessarily the right project for AMC, right? Or the various platforms within it. So I do think that there's kind of that learning process of understanding, like, well, what are the types of talent and content within that framing, like, do you feel like you've learned kind of or gotten a better handle on like what are the types of projects that you want to be seeing come out of that pipeline? Is it easier to put your finger on like what's attractive to you?
I mean, again, it's very iterative in that, like, I feel that with each month, I think like in our first go round, it was, we had just the bare categories we just described. And then the first one was like, okay, well, here's, a half dozen or a dozen projects. And then that was the first attempt of like, okay, these are interesting. The writing's interesting here. The performance is interesting here. The tone, direction, art direction, sort of inventiveness over here. And then with each subsequent round, sort of trying to nail down the best combinations of those. I think that it'll be interesting as we go forward, if we end up creating like I guess what I say to that, I don't know that we created like the platonic ideal project that's like, yes, this is the one we hold up as the gold standard for everything to come. Things should look, and probably should never be that. But I bet by the end of this year, we'll be able to answer that a lot clearer on like, here are the different kinds of content that really pop for us. It's, really tonally interesting in writing. I'm not sure yet. I think we're still kind of in the middle.
I'm always reluctant also to say we're looking for this kind of show or that kind of arena. Every once in a while, we as a group just have like a subject that we're excited about, that we're on the hunt for the right person to work within. But we really like to let the artists, I think, drive that and bring to us what's exciting to them, because I just think it creates stories that feel set apart from the crowd and unlike anything you've seen before. And that's the ultimate of what we're aiming for.
It's interesting because something that I'm very aware of kind of straddling these two worlds is that sometimes it does feel in talking to people within the TV industry that there's a little bit of an echo chamber about like what supposedly is hot right now. Like a month or two ago, people were talking about how they wanted like nice guy TV because Ted Lasso was such a hit. And I guess what I always worry about is, well, by the time you find a new nice guy TV show and it goes to air, we're talking about two years from now, we might be back to being horrible to each other, right? So it's like maybe that's not the best way to identify the types of the content that we're looking for. And I think I really appreciate the creators that we work with is that, they're very like heads down about like, no, this is my vision for the project. It's not really informed by what I'm hearing is hot or interesting right now. It's like, this is the thing that I cannot get out of my head and I need to get it down into a project. So that's that. And so when I think about that, it's more about like, what's interesting is when we have these conversations, how do your internal needs change over time? Less about like, let's put out kind of a specific framing for this is our ideal project. Do you feel like those needs are like changing, especially as been working together? Like, is it still about kind of IP for future development? Is it licensing whole cloth short form? Is it talent? Like, what's that evolution look like?
Yeah, I'd say number one, it definitely for us is about not being reactive, but kind of setting our own course and finding projects that feel like they stand alone on their own right and are filling gaps that we didn't even know we had in the content marketplace, to get a really corporate-y term in there. I think in terms of like how our needs are shifting, in the end, we're really looking for returnable series. We do limiteds all the time, but I think right now, especially, we're just kind of going like, what are those next big worlds that we can explore for 3, 4, 5, maybe more seasons? And stories that, whether they're genre or not, feel like they have the foundation for that, and are so rich on the character front that you can have enough gas to go with these characters for a really long journey. And then I think, we've started to do some half hours. Ultra City Smiths was one of them. That's not something that we've done them before, but I don't think that's something that AMC is predominantly known for. And I'm just talking AMC Plus. We obviously have IFC and a lot of other brands under our umbrella that do great comedy work. But for us, I think we're starting to look at, what does a comedy look like for us, or what's a half-hour drama like, and playing with that a bit more. So it's very, very broad in terms of what's shifting, I think.
Gotcha. We did have a question come in from the audience. I'll direct it to both of you. So any thoughts on alternative, experimental, or immersive platforms for short form content? They specifically mentioned TikTok for narrative storytelling, perhaps utilized in addition to streaming platforms.
A great question. We definitely are through. So, for instance, our Twitch channel does. They're a couple of the more popular programs on there are interactive storytelling projects that are ongoing on Twitch. In terms of like straight up, like, are there new ways to? We would love to see a real show that works for all the reasons that Laura just described, that comes up out of TikTok. I think we have seen some projects come through Stareable that take some formal risks and try to sort of tell stories via social media or something similar. I just don't know that we've necessarily cracked it. Probably the closest maybe, and it's not a perfect answer to the question, is early in the pandemic, Shudder produced a film called Host, which all took place on Zoom, basically a bunch of friends. It sounds like a total gimmick, but the movie is fantastic, and it's under an hour. So the length itself, they basically was like, Craig, who greenlit that, Shudder, was like, make it as long as it needs to be. We don't really care. We're a streaming service. Does it need to be 2 hours, an hour and a half? Doesn't matter. And it's basically a seance happening on Zoom that goes terribly, terribly wrong. But just really sort of lived into the concept and hit it at the right moment. I've seen lots of blah, blah, blah on Zoom ideas, though, that haven't pulled it off. So part of it also comes down to execution.
Yeah, I just, apropos of nothing, I just think what's happening on TikTok is really fascinating. And, we've seen films built off Twitter threads, and, social media is starting to be a source for IP. And then you have TikTok, where folks are making like a Ratatouille musical and writing songs. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but they wrote a whole musical, designed the sets, designed the programs, choreographed dances, all people kind of coming together on TikTok to organically create this project. And you do go like, okay, so this may be the next frontier of where we're going to find new stories. There's a lot to figure out, I think, with that in terms of how you do that and how a network like us would get involved. But it's been fascinating to watch, and I think it's got to be the future, or a future for sure.
Well, and that, I think, leads me to another question I had, which is, as you think about like content for different homes, right? SVOD, we talked about Shudder, Acorn, All Black, but also there's also the linear channels. There's also AMC Studios, which is, creating content and potentially taking it externally. Like, how do you think about the types of projects and IP that you're looking for, and is it evolving, like what you're looking to develop?
On a sort of, are we making decisions on a sort of platform basis, or?
Yeah, so kind of similar to what you just said about, Shudder saying, okay, so this hour-long feature, it doesn't need to be a length because Shudder doesn't have those sorts of requirements. Whereas, and that might also be true for, say, AMC Studios, taking something to a external streamer. And so, broader than just the duration of a project, like how are you thinking about like how these various homes inform the types of content and everything else?
Do you want to answer that? I have an answer, but I don't know, Laura, you're maybe closer to that than me.
It's an interesting question. I think yes and no. I think we still, know, especially for in-house, the networks and the streamers, kind of what works and what our audience appetite is. And so there are certain structures or not barriers, guardrails that we stay within. But I think what we're realizing is, again, the story guides it, and you want to serve the story. So that's where the conversation becomes about, like, whereas previously we may have pushed for a half-hour drama to get to that full hour. Now we're going, okay, well, we have AMC Plus. We're a little less. We don't need to be as stringent there. So maybe this is something where we're sticking to a half hour and kind of serving what feels best to the writer and the story that we're telling. So I think, we're keeping our eyes open and just kind of trying to let the content lead.
Yeah, I think that one thing I do think is clear after the last year and a half for us is that the streaming services give us a opportunity to push boundaries. Maybe not so much in format, although I'd argue with something like Ultra City Smiths, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know that show would exist if there was not AMC Plus as a streaming service to launch it on first. But also in terms of being able to push the boundaries. So Laura brought up Gangs of London, which is an amazing, amazing show and is insanely violent. I love violence personally on film. And it's some of the best violence I think I've ever seen on TV. I don't know that show, I don't know that show could exist if it wasn't already like, hey, we have a streaming platform that we can let it, off the hook there, and not necessarily need to worry about some of the S&P problems we'd run into with that show if it was just strictly a linear cable show.
And that's a great example because, we launched that on AMC Plus. It had a really passionate audience, and then it got a linear run, because we'd been able to showcase it there first. So yeah, that's a good example of that.
So last question. I think it's interesting to ask people within the industry because it's become such a water cooler question of our time. You've mentioned some AMC shows, but like, what are you two watching these days? Like, what gets you excited that's on television right now?
I can start. I'm going to echo what everyone's been talking about for the last month, but I love Ted Lasso. And I think for me working in international programming, it's one of the most seamless ways to kind of have an American abroad and make it really feel organic to the story, and informative when it needs to be, but also there are times where you step back and just let them be people in a room together. So beyond all of the, bomb for the soul elements of that show that make it such a pleasure to watch, I think, it again shows that there are shows that can thrive telling global stories.
Yeah, I mean, I watch a little of everything, and we all watch a little of everything. So, but I'd say the ones that have stood out of late were The Investigation, which was an amazing international show on HBO or HBO Max. I'm not exactly sure where it premiered. What We Do in the Shadows is like our family favorite. I think we also love a show. It's not a new show, but for some reason my family has been obsessed with the show Taskmaster, which is a UK show. It's you can get it on YouTube basically, and it's a show that's been running probably for 12 seasons now, where a panel of British comedians are given completely lunatic, ridiculous tasks to complete in order to win the game. It's complete. You call Ted Lasso sort of the bomb for the soul. For us, I think this is like the mindless entertainment, I'd say, for our house right now. But those are some of our big ones.
Another I'd throw out, and it's hard to find, but it's out there if you look, Gogglebox, which is a show from the UK that's literally, I don't know if anyone's seen it, it's a bunch of regular people that they film sitting down together watching TV. So it's families, it'll be a brother and sister, or a pair of good friends, and they just watch highlights from British TV during the week. But again, for me, it's fascinating. You're watching viewers kind of take in a show, and it's charming, and it really, especially over lockdown, is that communal experience that you couldn't really get anywhere else. So that's if you're ever in the UK, I highly recommend it.
Amazing. Thank you both. Thank you both for being a part of this panel, taking the time. I think it's we're gonna wrap up here. I just want to say thank you again to Kevin Dreyfuss and Laura Luckenbaugh for joining us today and sharing their experiences and insight. Thank you again to AMC Networks for being our partner for Stareable Fest and Stareable overall. Thank you all for joining us, participating with questions, and just being a part of this amazing community of creators. Stareable Fest is presented by Dell Technologies with NVIDIA, making workstation and monitor solutions purpose-built for creators like you. We'll see you at our next session, which is from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern today. Our panel exploring virtual production and game engines when worlds collide with masters of all things virtual production, Andrew McDonald of Cream, William McMaster of Occupied, Tim Hatch of APG, and moderated by Matt Allard of Dell. Feel free to stay in this room and chat with your fellow festival attendees until you jump over to the next event. Just click on someone else in the room to chat. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.